A 14-year-old went out for a morning jog and never came back. 40 years later, not a trace of her has ever been found. But this is not only the story of a girl who vanished. It is the story of an investigation so badly botched that her own sister put on a police badge to work the case herself, and discovered that much of the original evidence had simply been destroyed. Two failures stacked on top of each other. And at the center of both, a girl named Beth Miller, still out there somewhere, still waiting. To understand how a child could vanish from her own neighborhood and stay gone for 4 decades, you have to start with the town. Idaho Springs, Colorado. A small former gold mining town tucked into a steep canyon along the mountain highway west of Denver, ringed by pine and rock. The kind of place where the air is thin and everyone knows everyone. Beth Miller was 14 years old, a teenager in the summer of 1983, the season between school years. Long, bright mountain mornings, the whole town awake early to beat the August heat. She had a habit a lot of kids that summer had picked up. She liked to run. On the morning of August 16th, she pulled on a pair of white jogging shorts and a blue t-shirt, and she headed out the door of her family's home for a jog. It was an ordinary morning in an ordinary town. A 14-year-old going for a run a few blocks from her own front door, the way she had 100 times before. There was no reason on earth to think she wouldn't be back for breakfast. She didn't come back for breakfast. She didn't come back at all. The last place anyone is sure they saw her was near an old convenience store. A 7-Eleven not far from her route, and there the few threads the case would ever have begun. A witness would later describe Beth near that store, possibly talking to a man in a red pickup truck, an older model with a white camper shell on the back. It is, to this day, the single most concrete lead in the entire case. When Beth didn't return, her family raised the alarm. The town searched. Volunteers walked the canyon, the creek, the steep wooded slopes that rise on every side of Idaho Springs. They searched the places a person could fall and the places a person could be hidden. They found nothing. No clothing, no sign of a struggle, no body. A 14-year-old had stepped out for a run on a clear August morning, and the mountains had closed behind her, like she'd never existed at all. Here is where the first failure begins, because the investigation that was supposed to find Beth Miller barely seems to have happened at all. In 1983, a small mountain police department was not built for a case like this. There was no major crimes unit, no real protocol for a stranger abduction of a child, and the agencies that should have worked together, the town police, the county, the state, did not. Leads went unworked. The man in the red truck was never identified. Witnesses who could have been interviewed in the first crucial days were not, or were, and it was never written down. The early hours of a missing child case are the ones that matter most, and in Beth's case, they slipped away. Months passed, then years. Beth's file thinned instead of thickening. It moved to the back of a drawer in a department that had no one assigned to it and no real intention of reopening it. For most missing kids in 1983, that would have been the end. The case would simply dissolve into silence. But Beth Miller had a younger sister, and that sister was not going to let her disappear twice. Her name is Lynn McLaughlin. When Beth vanished, Lynn was a kid herself, a little sister who lost her older sister overnight, and then watched the adults whose job it was to find her come up empty. Most people carrying that would try to look away from it. Lynn did the opposite. She decided that if no one was going to work her sister's case, she would learn how to work it herself. So she became a police officer. She joined the very department that had handled Beth's disappearance, the Idaho Springs Police, and later the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office. She put on the uniform, earned the access, and went looking for her sister's file. Think about what that takes. To spend your career inside the same system that failed your family, knowing that somewhere in its drawers is the paperwork on the worst day of your life. Lynn did it anyway. She wanted the file, and when she finally got to it, after all those years of working toward this one moment, what she found was so much worse than a cold case. It was a case that had been gutted. Most of the original case file was gone, not lost, not misplaced, destroyed. The records from the early investigation, the notes, the reports, the raw material that a cold case detective would need to ever rebuild what happened. Much of it had been purged over the years, as if Beth's disappearance were a routine file with an expiration date instead of a missing child. And it gets worse. Lynn's work pointed to a possible burial site, a specific place where Beth might have been left. But when the time came to search it, that ground had been disturbed. Heavy equipment had been moved on top of the very spot, making a proper excavation enormously difficult. Step back and look at what that means. A child vanishes, the evidence that could find her is destroyed, and the one place that might hold an answer is buried under machinery. At every stage where the system could have preserved a chance, the chance was taken away. Through all of it, one lead has never gone away. The man in the red pickup truck, an older red truck with a white camper shell, seen near the store near Beth, on the morning she disappeared. In a case stripped of so much else, that description has survived for 40 years because it is the one solid thing anyone has. But a truck is not a name. The man was never identified in 1983, when he might still have been found. And every year that passed made him harder to find. Memories fade, vehicles are scrapped. People who knew something grow old and die. It is important to be careful here. No one has ever been charged in Beth Miller's disappearance. The man in the red truck is not a suspect with a name. He is a description. A shape at the edge of the last morning anyone saw her. To call him anything more would be to repeat the very sloppiness that wrecked this case. And so the question that should have been answered in days has stayed open for decades, long enough for an official reckoning to finally arrive. By the mid-2000s, the pressure that Lynn and her family had built up could no longer be ignored. The case went to a grand jury. A grand jury is supposed to decide whether there is enough to charge someone with a crime. In Beth Miller's case, in 2006, it did something rarer. It turned its attention on the investigation itself. Its conclusion was damning. The grand jury found a clear lack of professionalism in how the case had been handled, across multiple agencies, the local police, the county, the state. Not one failure by one person, but a systemic breakdown spread across the institutions that were supposed to find a child. And then, having said all of that out loud, the grand jury indicted no one. There was no longer enough surviving evidence to charge anyone. Not for taking Beth, and not for the botched investigation that followed. For the family, that is a particular kind of cruelty, to be told officially that the system failed your child, and in the same breath, that nothing will be done about it. There was no body to bury. Years earlier, in 1994, Beth had been declared legally dead, a courtroom formality that changes a status on a piece of paper and changes nothing in a mother's heart. There was still no grave, no answer, no one held to account. And Lynn kept going. She had found a t-shirt at one point, at the site she suspected, a fragment, a maybe, the kind of thread that in a properly preserved case might have meant everything, and in this one could not be run to ground. Decades of this, a sister in uniform, chasing a case the system had hollowed out, holding on to the one description that survived, and the conviction that her sister deserved more than silence. And then, after more than 40 years, something finally moved. In early 2024, the Idaho Springs police did something the department had not done in a generation. They formally reopened the case of Beth Miller. A detective, Sergeant Ryan Frost, was put on it. New tools exist now that did not exist in 1983. Databases, forensic genealogy, the slow patient science of examining what little remains. And the state put Beth's face back in front of the public on a billboard, asking the question the town had been asking for 40 years. Does anyone remember anything? It is, on its face, hopeful. But it carries an unbearable irony. The reopening is only necessary because the first investigation was allowed to rot, because evidence was destroyed and ground was buried and leads were left to go cold. They are now trying to rebuild from almost nothing, a case that should never have been lost in the first place. Whether it works, no one yet knows. As of now, there is no arrest, no recovery, no name attached to that red truck. There is a reopened file, a detective, a billboard, and a sister who has spent her whole life refusing to look away. So strip it back to what is actually known. On August 16, 1983, a 14-year-old named Beth Miller went for a morning jog in Idaho Springs, Colorado, and never came home. She was last seen near a store, possibly speaking to a man in a red truck. She has never been found, everything that should have followed. The careful investigation, the preserved evidence, the lead run to ground, did not happen or was undone. A grand jury said so plainly, and then could do nothing. A sister gave her career to it, and is still waiting. That is the second tragedy folded inside the first. A girl was taken from a mountain town, and then the people and the systems meant to bring her back failed her so completely that, 4 decades on, we cannot even say for certain what happened in the space of a single August morning. Beth Miller would be in her 50s now. Somewhere out there is the truth of what happened to her on that run. And somewhere, maybe, is the person who knows it. The case is open again. And the only honest thing left to say is that, after all this time, we still do not know.